Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. This civic media education program is produced by WCKN, student-run cable television of Clarkson University. The program is a partnership production of Clarkson Center for Excellence in Communication, St. Lawrence County Chapter of the American Association of University Women, and the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters. My name is Ellen Heenan. I'm a student in a course at Clarkson called Mass Media and Society. I and a number of my classmates provide the production crew for this series. The opinions expressed on this program are those of the speakers and do not represent the views of the producers, WCKN, or Clarkson University.
Good morning, Marie. Welcome to this beautiful fall day and this particular program. This is a continuation of what we started last week, a week ago, talking about the possibilities for additional cooperation, for innovation, and for other things that could be done to increase the delivery, the efficiency of the delivery of services, whether or not the village dissolves. This is not a discussion of about dissolution of the village and whether it should be dissolved or not. It is a discussion of things that could be done and hopefully should be done, will be done, regardless of whether the village dissolves or not. So with that, we would like to just continue talking about some of the opportunities for shared services. One of the first things that was discussed last week, and I think one of the first things we should discuss this week, is courts. Whether or not we have the possibility of combining the courts or some other method of ending up with better efficiency.
Bob, I'm glad you started out this conversation by saying that the issue here is not whether or not dissolution happens, but what are some of the ways that we could improve by sharing services and by combining our equipment and our ideas, both village and town together, to improve the government for everyone in the town of Potsdam. And I think that the last year and a half, when the committee has worked so hard to decide what issues need to be examined, has been very valuable, because I think it's pointed out to everyone ideas that we perhaps have thought about but have not delineated clearly, or new ideas that have come up that show us how we could work together and better the product for town and village. Now, you want to talk about courts? We're ahead of the curve there, Bob. As you know, several years ago when we went to referendum about building a new town hall, that was defeated. But the truth of the matter is that our 118-year-old building on Market Street has been deficient in a number of ways, not only in size but in structure. And we've been very, very fortunate to receive a grant from SHPO, the Historical Preservation Society, that has allowed us to receive $300,000 that we have to match dollar for dollar to rehabilitate that building. We also have gotten letters from the state repeatedly that we are deficient in not having an elevator. That doesn't give us handicap accessibility, particularly in the court, which is on the second floor. We received a $20,000 grant from the state court system to upgrade our courts. So what we have been doing for the last year is rehabilitating 35 Market Street so that it will be functioning when we're finished as a court. Now, the court will be changed completely in the sense that it will finally be handicap accessible. It will have a jury room. It will have a room for the lawyers to confer with their clients. All of the chairs in the courtroom will be fastened to the floor. All of these strictures come from the state, and I think that many of them have to do with big city environments, not the kind of small town court we have. Nevertheless, we're going to adhere to all of them. The one problem we will have adhering to are the windows. There are not supposed to be any windows in the court. But because we've received a historical preservation grant, we can't change the windows. So we are trying to perhaps get shutters on the inside that will be closed when the court is in session. Now, what will this mean for the town and the village? One of the things that has been suggested is that we either have a joint structure that we both share and keep a village court and a town court separate. And that could work out fine because court meets on different days for the village and the town. Or if the village prefers, we could collapse it into one town court and our building will be adequate for that purpose also.
One of the difficulties with the present location, regardless of the renovations to the building, is accessibility and parking.
That's true. But I think that we have the same problem for both buildings right now. If you go on court days to the village, you will find that there are a great number of cars parked on the street. And I admit that it would be lovely if we could have a new location and pay for a court that would be absolutely perfect. This is the one defect in having the court at 35 Market Street. Nevertheless, we've had the money, we need to make changes, we've tried to look ahead, and we've tried to do something that we think will be of benefit to both the town and the village.
Should I raise the specter of 18 Elm Street?
Perhaps not yet. I think that we have to have that conversation after the election and after we know if dissolution will or will not happen. Certainly, when we make all the changes to our building so that it will meet the requirements that the state says are necessary for a court, we will have even less room. Even when just the elevator goes in, we'll have less room. And it was an already too small situation. So we are going to have to put our other workers who are not connected directly with the court someplace. Whether that will be at 18 Elm or in some other location will have to be decided. I will say this, we have money set aside for that purpose that comes from the Brookfield monies. So we are prepared for any eventuality.
Okay. So there is the possibility both of either of having a shared court or having shared space for the two courts.
Absolutely.
So, all right. You mentioned Brookfield. Perfect opportunity to go into our next topic, and that is the money that is being received by both the village and the town from the Empire Zone monies coming through Brookfield. It's my understanding that that is shared 50-50 between the village and the town and amounts to a reasonable amount of money for both entities each year. Now, I guess my first question on that is, how long will the Empire Zones continue? The state of New York and the difficulty that they're facing with their budgets now, how long can we depend on that kind of income?
We can't depend on it at all. And that's why the village and the town agreed with Brookfield, and we wrote an intermunicipal agreement that said those monies would never be used for the annual budget. They're set aside for capital projects, for things that needed to be purchased in large equipment that would have caused, an undue burden on the taxpayer. So we've been very careful with what we've done with that money. In the town, we have a separate bank account, a separate checkbook, and we've never used it for the regular budget. Now, what have we done with that? Well, I think we've been very wise with it. We have shared monies to buy the ladder truck, for instance, for the Potsdam Fire Department. That amounted to several $100,000 from each of us. In our case, we've used it to enlarge the town highway building, which was too small to house some of the new equipment that we had purchased. We have used it in a number of ways to benefit the community without making the local taxpayer pay a dime more.
And the village has used some of their money to repave some of the streets in the village, many of which are in very, very poor condition. And I don't think they could get money in fast enough to take all care of all of them as they should. Any other things that, in the intermunicipal agreement, any other items or in other areas that are important?
We don't have too many other intermunicipal agreements, but what we do have, and we can always improve upon, is sharing of services. I don't think people realize how many things our highway departments share. Town equipment has always been shared with not only the village of Potsdam, but of course the village of Norwood. And we have purchased equipment and together. For instance, just this last year, we bought a ladder truck with Norwood, and that truck is able to cut limbs, that are falling down from trees, and to perform services for brush and weed removal. And that has saved the village of Norwood and the village of Potsdam, and the town of Potsdam money by going in together. In the town and village, for years and years, over 25 years, we've shared equipment and services. We helped to pave the village of Potsdam. We helped pave the village of Norwood. We let each other use pavers, trucks. So there's always been at least $50,000 to $60,000 worth of shared services and equipments between the town and village in the highway department alone. Another thing that we do, Pine Street and the arena, the maintenance of the Pine Street swimming area has always been done by the town of Potsdam. That property is owned by the village, but it's used by the entire township. And the other swimming area that the town owns has always been maintained, by the town of Potsdam also. So the two swimming areas are maintained by the town of Potsdam, although one is owned by the village and one is owned by the town.
Let me go back to the DPW and the highway department issue for a minute. During the time I was village administrator, that very same program was in place and worked very well to the benefit of the village. The village paid for the materials, and the town provided the paver and the trucks, along with the village trucks, and the manpower. Now, one of the things that seems to be happening in the state now is the requirement to have a formal program that is signed by both parties to ensure that all the employees are covered, regardless of where they're working. At the time I was administrator, it was an informal thing. Has it been formalized since?
I believe it's still informal, and it's been working well. I'm sure if the state puts pressure that it's necessary, there'll be no problem with, setting up a formal agreement. In small towns like this, most of the time, a handshake and goodwill and continued performance that proves that you want to cooperate has been enough. But as you say, the state may feel differently, and it would be no problem to enact that if necessary.
I don't know about you, but I was much more comfortable on the handshake level. Other shared services, we've talked about the fire department. We really didn't get into that in detail last week. But just so everyone understands, the village has 4 paid fire drivers. When a call for a village fire comes in, they drive the first truck there, and then the rest of the volunteers come there. If the call comes from outside of the village, they do not drive the truck past the village line. The first volunteer to come in takes the truck, and the driver mans the communications at the station. And that has continued to work very well to the benefit of everybody in both the village and the town. Are there any additional changes that should be made there that would benefit everybody?
I'm not really sure about that, Bob. I don't think that most people realize that the town gives $97,000 to the Potsdam Village Volunteer Fire Department, but that we also fund 3 other fire departments, West Potsdam, Norwood, and Hanawa. Our total fire budget is $202,000, but we give $97,000 to the village of Potsdam. It's really never been a real issue that the village paid for fire drivers stop at the village line and then volunteers have to go outside. Because the response time of our volunteers has been so wonderful that we've never had any problems. That might be something that we should look at and see if we could change so that there wouldn't be any hesitancy at all. When a fire call came in, maybe they would go directly outside of the village.
And that would require the same kind of agreement.
Yes, but
that
then
we're
that would
talking about.
necessitate, of course, us funding the 4 paid fire drivers, which is a considerable sum.
Sure.
So that isn't something that I could decide. The whole board would have to, with colloquy from the citizens, I guess. Because right now, it's working pretty well.
We're not going to decide anything
No.
this morning. We know that. We're going to talk about it. So.
Absolutely not.
Okay, we have other shared services, and the DPW and the fire services have been the standards, have set the tone, and the Recreation Commission, the joint commission between the village and the town, to me, is the example that should work and should be expanded to other areas. So one of the other areas is code enforcement. And what are the possibilities for a joint code enforcement operation? What are the differences between the town and the village codes? Would that be a problem in having a single code enforcement officer, regardless of whether the village dissolves or not?
Some people have said if something isn't broke, don't fix it. I always think you can improve things, but I don't know if you need to change things 100%. I was on the subcommittee, I was actually on several of them, but I was on the subcommittee that had to do with code enforcement. And we literally, there were 4 of us, sat down and took the 2 code books, page by page, to compare them. And to my surprise, between 75 and 80% of what was in each code book was identical because it was state mandated boilerplate. The other 20% really were not vastly different, but because of the population density in the village, there might be more detail or more restrictions simply out of common sense. So we quickly decided that if dissolution happened, it would be very easy to just coalesce those 2 code books into one with very little difficulty. One of the suggestions that was made, however, was that the town of Potsdam should increase by at least 1 person their code enforcement office. And we really agreed with that. And so in this next year's budget, we have made sure that we will be able to hire another person to help with the paperwork with our code enforcement officer so that he can be out in the road even more than he is. But the mention was made that maybe they should share an office. Well, if dissolution doesn't happen, I'm not sure that's necessary because it would just add to a citizen's confusion when they call somebody and then they'd have to either be sent to the town code enforcement officer or to the village code enforcement officer. And we like having our code enforcement officer near our assessor. Why? Because when new buildings are constructed or when additions or renovations are made by a citizen, they go to the code enforcement officer to get building permits. And what the code enforcement officer does in the town is to send those to the assessor to help to keep the data up to date when revals are done. And it's so much easier when you just have to walk across the room than it would be if you were in a separate building.
So there are some distinct parallels between the code enforcement and the courts then.
Yes.
Some of the same problems exist, some of the same opportunities
Yes.
exist, but it could be done.
It could be done.
Okay. One final topic that I know you're not awfully eager to talk about, if I understand it correctly, is economic development. That's one of the areas where, and the first question I have on that is whether or not a joint committee or a joint council could be set up between the village and the town to try and hammer out a comprehensive program for development in the entire town, including village and town outside. And whether or not you think that would be possible to arrive at something after spending some time studying it that would be acceptable to all parties and would be beneficial to all parties.
I think anytime you say that you don't want to talk, you should leave office. I think that it would be beneficial at any time, at any place, to continue the conversation about a shared vision for economic development. I think that perception sometimes distorts the truth. The reality is that the village and the town really cooperate on so many levels. There probably is only one bone of contention, and that is whether growth can happen outside the village unless annexation is part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
There has been a rule for about 10 years that no water and sewer will be extended beyond the village limits unless that property is annexed into the village. And there is sort of a misunderstanding. There may be a belief that the town is being obstinate when saying, no, that's not always a good thing, especially for the town outside. People believe that it's a win-win situation in every case for both the village and the town. And the reason is that on a piece of property, a town outside person would pay $3.31 per thousand on that parcel. Once it's annexed into the village, the town outside citizen no longer pays. But that property is taxed to the village, and so a village taxpayer would pay $2.36 per thousand, a difference of 95 cents that the town outside would lose. That sounds like a paltry sum, especially if you are a village citizen who pays almost $15 per thousand in property tax. But to the town outside citizen whose property tax is $3.31, the 95-cent loss is a 29% loss of their property tax. So it's a considerable thing that has to be considered. Now, am I saying that annexation into the village should never be done? Absolutely not. Just a year ago, we were very willing to sell property called the Pest House Road to the village of Potsdam so that Lowe's would be contiguous to the village property and thus legally able to annex. Why did we do that? Because a water tower was going to be built that would be of benefit to the village and the town. We need it for fire services on that end of the township. So we were more than willing to cooperate there. On the Hatch Road in Potsdam, several years ago, UPS really felt they were having difficulty with their water and sewer systems, and they wanted municipal water and sewer. UPS is essential to the village and town for efficiency and for good business. It helps the entire township. So of course, we allowed that annexation without a ripple. But in some cases, just as the village wishes, we sometimes would like to enlarge our tax base. And we would like to see if both parties could sit down and see if there are instances when, because of sales tax that would be generated, because of the services that would be provided, that sometimes the town outside could enlarge their tax base by the village allowing water and sewer to be purchased by a developer.
Let's discuss that for a minute, though. If the village were to provide water and sewer to someone in the town, and that increases the tax base for the town, there's no tax that's coming to the village, and no offer that I've heard discussed meaningfully to provide the village with some share of that additional tax revenue. There would be additional strain on both the water treatment plant and the sewage treatment plant. And the implication in the discussions that have been held in several places is that, well, your water rate would go down. The water rate would not go down because if it went down, it would go down at best pennies per thousand of gallons. And there would not be very much benefit because the water service cannot be a profit-making service. It pays for the creation of the potable water that we have available and sets aside some money for maintenance and for additional renovations as necessary. So there can't be a profit that's made. So regardless, even if the entity outside the village paid double the water rate, that's still a very small amount of money.
It would depend, Bob, I think, on the scope of the project.
Sure.
Now, if you're talking about the one that's trying to get into this community right now, it's a $20 million project with 199 units, and all of those units would be separately metered and billed for water and sewer. I know very well that water and sewer can't be profit-making. It has to break even. The money you take in has to equal what you have to spend. But you and I know that water and sewer lines are very old and take a lot of money to repair in the village. And the village has been doing a great job trying to remedy years of service on those lines. And it's very expensive. So if water and sewer was paid by a developer twice the times, twice the money that a village consumer would pay, it could give some money to help repair those sewer and water lines. I also think you always have to look at the big picture. In the case of this latest venture that I hope we're going to be able to work cooperatively upon, these high-end professional apartments are needed, at least that's what the hospital director says, and both college presidents or their representatives have said, for incoming faculty and for professionals at the hospital. Many of those citizens are working outside, living outside the village and the town. Some of them as far as Cranberry Lake. And maybe if they moved into town, they would be doing their business downtown. They would be increasing the sales tax that we both share, because it doesn't have anything to do with the point of origin when a sale is made. The sales tax goes into a kitty, into the county, and is divided simply by assessment and population.
Okay, I'm going to quickly respond. Those apartments would generate about $45,000 a year in additional fees above and beyond the regular fees paid for water service, an additional $45,000. That's not an awful lot of money when you're talking about what we're talking about necessary for repairs. The other issue, and there's, yes, but it still ends up, in my view, that the village taxpayers don't really benefit from that. So we can get into that later. But
let's get into that.
But let's get into sales tax distribution for a minute. You're aware of the fact that I'm the one that raised that nasty issue 25 years ago when sales tax was distributed based on taxable assessed value.
Which was not fair. And
That's
we
correct.
Backed you to the hill.
I know you did. But when they changed it to 50% population and 50% taxable assessed value. The village of Potsdam is 75% tax exempt. The town of Potsdam is what? What's the level of tax exemption?
Not as high as that.
No.
I couldn't tell you precisely.
So the village is hurt twice. To
I'm
me,
sorry,
that's
but-
not the issue that we need to be discussing. We can get into that in future, and I think we have topics here for some
But also-
future programs, and they're giving us the, so we're going to have to quit. Anyways,
I'm sorry,
we
but
could
we're
probably
out of
go
time.
on for hours on this particular issue.
I
And
still think we can cooperate.
I think we can too, and I think we need to. We just got to cooperate so that we're all going to
I'm sorry,
benefit.
but we are out of time now. On behalf of the organizers, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to talk with us and for your willingness to participate in the local civic media program. Please come back next week for another candidate conversation. Until then, our North Country matters.